All right, welcome to this episode of Intellectual Conservatism. Today I'm here with Kyle Allender of Christian Idealism. I think that's the name of the page. I got it right. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's
All
right.
right. And I'm excited to really start talking about different areas of the philosophy of religion and also of the Christian faith. So I'm excited to have Kyle on the show. Kyle, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, my name is Kyle Allender. I've kind of jumped around the apologetics community for some time. I've only recently started a YouTube channel, and now I'm more active within the apologetics community. I'm still pretty young for my age, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I try my best to study as much as I can and understand both sides of the argument whenever there's an issue. So yeah.
So are you, okay, I'm going to guess your age. Are you 18?
Yes, 18.
All right, I got it right. Woo! All right, I'm 19, so we're not that far off from each
Yeah.
other. So today I just have a general layout of what I want to talk about. We're going to start off by looking at Kyle's philosophy, which is idealism, if that's like the simple shorthand for it, right? That's how it goes.
Right. Yeah, that's how it goes.
And then we can go to why belief in God matters. We can discuss some pressing social issues and cultural issues with the Christian faith. And then just finally, how to prepare Christians for the world today. So this will be, I think, a very exciting, fruitful discussion. So let's start off with idealism then. Could you explain what exactly is idealism?
Well, idealism, it's kind of like it's a metaphysical view of the world, but it's also like this ontological view of the world. So if you think in terms like of materialism, where everything's material, all that exists is matter, that any mental state is just material states and so on and so forth. Whereas idealism is kind of like the exact opposite, where instead of everything being material states, everything's actually mental states. So there's obviously, ontologically speaking, they're exact opposites of each other. And now there are different forms of idealism, but the one I hold to is objective idealism, which does accept the reality of an objective world. I just say that the reality of an objective world is still mental, even though it's not necessarily our mental states. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's basically what it's basically like reverse physicalism, if you want to kind of. And then of course dualism would be like in between the two views. So under dualism, you would have the reality of both the mental world and the physical world. So that would be dualism, but I'm an idealist. So I do accept a reality, a mental reality, but I don't accept a reality that's outside of consciousness, basically.
All right, so then this kind of reminds me of inspiring philosophies. Is it the cosmic consciousness argument?
Well, yeah, that's one. There's also the introspective argument.
Yeah, yeah.
There's also other arguments you could make, but yeah, we do hold the same view.
All right, so before we get into the arguments, I'm interested, first off, can you describe what is the mental world, right? What are these terms meaning for the audience? If,
Okay,
try to
so
put them down, yeah.
I basically like a mental world is anything within consciousness. Now, consciousness, how I define it, it's just literally what it's like. So like consciousness is basically mental activity is conscious if there is something, anything it is like to have such mental activity in and of itself. And so the reason why I use that definition is because I don't have to, because some people will say, oh well, your consciousness is like your knowledge of the world or your personality. But
Hmm.
that's not really what it really means. What consciousness actually is just experience itself. Now
I
you
see.
could have
Hmm.
experiences without necessarily having knowledge of those experiences, but you're still going to have, like, for example, like when you're dreaming, there are a lot of dreams we don't remember, but it's not like we didn't have those experiences, right? So that would be like just pure consciousness, where it's like,
Hmm.
you have this thing in and of itself. There is something it is like to be you. Or in other words, I like to say that there is something it is like to be our brains, and that's why you have the things like the hard problem of consciousness. And how is it that if our experiences are just reduced to these non-experiential states, then how is it that our experience is itself a non-experiential state? And that's kind of the hard problem of consciousness. But for me, since I'm an idealist, I take consciousness as fundamental, and that's basically all that exists, is just experience in and of itself. And so any knowledge that we gain of experience, that comes in addition to our experience, but it's not experience itself. So yeah, that's basically the view.
Hmm.
That I think that's the best way I could kind of put it. So
So there's a lot that we could do with that. Uh, let's first describe what is exactly the problem of consciousness, right? So some people might say, well, what's the problem with it, right? Isn't it just the brain firing off neurons, and isn't that just what conscious experience is? Or what's there to it that's so complicated?
Well, what's complicated is you could explain the brain in terms of functions or in terms of knowledge without actually explaining the experience in and of itself. And so, like David Chalmers, for example, he talks about like philosophical zombies, which are basically beings that like have knowledge and they actually do have like a sense of like making choices, and like their brains work just like a normal human brain, but they don't have consciousness, and because they don't have the experience in and of itself. And so while it's true that they may act like they're conscious and they may seem like they're conscious and their brains may exactly be the same as ours, they're not really conscious because they don't have the in and of itself subjective perspective of consciousness. So the reason why it's such a hard, or the reason why it's like such a hard issue, is because a lot of people confuse what's called self-reflexive consciousness with consciousness proper. And so when people are trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness, for example, they will say, oh, well, we should look at people with Alzheimer's where they'll lose their memory and therefore they'll lose their consciousness. Well, no, they're not losing their consciousness. They're just losing the knowledge of their consciousness. But they're obviously they still have their consciousness, right? And so the hard problem is, how do you explain consciousness itself? And if the materialist is right, or if the reductionist is right, and that that our brains are nothing more than just chemical interactions going on, if our brains are not fundamental to consciousness, or if consciousness is like an emergent property of matter, then you're going to run into this problem of, well, how is it that this emergent property is itself non-experiential? How is it that something that's non-experiential, or something that's not in and of itself, can create something in and of itself? And that's the hard problem of consciousness, because there's just no any conceivable solution that you can come up with is it's gonna have this contradiction basically. So
then your way around the problem would just be to say that maybe consciousness is this immaterial, fundamental, I don't know if you want to say entity or substance.
I wouldn't really say the word immaterial. I'll just say it's just fundamental in and of itself. Like I don't really, because I mean, it depends on how you define immaterial and material, because some people would say that, oh, anything that's material is something that's real, whereas it kind of really depends on how you. But yeah, I mean, I just basically say that consciousness in and of itself, that's that's all that exists, and then everything from that kind of emerges from consciousness.
Well, I actually think that too, like if we look at the cosmic consciousness and introspective argument, that might help, maybe make some things more clear, right? And also more interesting, because then I think maybe people will start realizing like, oh no, wait, this problem of consciousness is so much deeper than they realize. I mean, I know in the philosophy community especially, like this is something that's just been constantly perplexing us. And we've seen some very, very interesting departures from materialism, from non-religious philosophers.
Right. And well, I mean, you have, I can't remember his name. There's like this one, he wrote a book against neo-Darwinism. He's like an atheist philosopher.
Thomas Nagel.
Thomas Nagel, yes, him. He's a good example of someone that's realized the problem is like, hey, you need to, we got to get, like, if we can't explain consciousness, we shouldn't hold this view. Like, we should find alternatives. And so, I mean, yeah, I do agree with you. You even have atheist philosophers like him that argue that against the reductionistic view of the world, and it's because of this hard problem. And the issue is within academia, there's like a lot of potential solutions to the problem, but the problem is that they're confusing the knowledge of conscious experience with consciousness itself. And so that's why I kind of brought up the Alzheimer's example, because they'll say, oh, with Alzheimer's, they lose knowledge of their own experiences. Well, yeah, they may lose the knowledge of their own experiences, but they're still experiencing something. So you're not going to that doesn't really explain what consciousness actually is. Because consciousness is much more deeper than that. It's not something that you could explain from, neurochemistry in the brain. That's why I take it as just fundamental. It's just properly basic to reality. So
then what would be some reasons for holding to idealism in your view, or the strongest reasons, let's say?
Well, okay, the strongest reasons why, I mean, if you just take basic philosophy, like, or just basic like epistemic philosophy, where everything that we experience is ultimately experiential, right? And so everything we experience is ultimately mental. And so you could describe everything that we experience in mental terms without making the leap of this extra material reality that's somehow beyond that. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm an idealist, is because if I'm trying to justify a world beyond consciousness, I'm going to have to make some logical leaps that are really hard to justify. And so for me, it's like, well, if I'm just going to use Occam's razor for a second, I'm just going to say everything is just mental in nature. So there's no need for me to add on this extra ontology of something that's non-mental. And so that's why, that's just from the philosophical standpoint. And then, you go into like things like quantum mechanics, and you look at the observer effect. And in fact, I'm actually doing a whole series in a few weeks on the interpretations of quantum mechanics. And one of the things is, when it comes to the collapse of the wave function, it seems like if you were to take the standard model of physics, that conscious observers are necessary. And so that would, again, support this idealist view of the world. And then, of course, when you look at things like emergent space-time, same example, where it's like, well, if everything that we call physical is just emergent, right? And then you look at the neurocognitive studies of what's called quantum cognition, where you literally have models that are explaining quantum mechanics and explaining our mental states in terms of quantum mechanics. Well, you connect that with the fact that space-time emerges, then you put those two together, and you're going to get a view of the world that basically says that space-time emerges from a conscious state. And so that's another big reason why I'm an idealist. And so yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of good reasons. Now, I'm not saying that therefore dualism is wrong, because I understand that, you could have a dualistic explanation as well. But because of Occam's razor, then I just apply Occam's razor to dualism. It's like, okay, well, if dualism can explain the same data, then there's no need for me to assume this extra material ontology. And so just shave it off, and all you got left is idealism.
So
yeah.
If we could back up a little bit, what is the observer effect in quantum mechanics?
Well, it has to do with like the collapse of the wave function, and typically like the practical way you address the issue is to just say that, particles interact with each other and therefore they cause collapse. Well, that's fine. I mean, that's the Copenhagen interpretation, where it's just basically like just one particle interacts with another and then they cause collapse of the wave function. That's fine. That's if you're going to take a purely pragmatic approach to quantum mechanics, then yes, you could just make that conclusion, like, oh, there's no need for conscious observers because you can just explain everything through interaction with particles. The problem is you need to ask the question, what caused collapse of the first particle? And so on. So you kind of have like this first cause problem, where it's like, okay, well, if this particle caused collapse of this particle, well, what caused collapse of that particle? And you keep on going back and back and back until eventually you have to get to something that's not physical, something that doesn't follow the same rules as quantum mechanics. And so that's why, you would have to go back to ultimately a conscious observer that causes collapse.
So then this actually opens up kind of the next part I wanted to talk to you about, which is the connection of idealism to theism itself.
Right.
So I'll let you kind of show me let me see what the rabbit hole leads me to, right? So we go from idealism, right, all the way down to what kind of God, or what would you define as God in this view, or how do we get there?
Well, okay, so I talked about before how, well, if conscious observers are necessary, well, we need to ask the question, well, what created conscious observers, right? If it's not produced, if consciousness is fundamental, okay, then we need to ask the question, well, is there what's called a universal consciousness that encompasses all of reality? Because obviously, I do accept that there is an objective world out there. I don't have control over what's going on out there. And so obviously, if everything's mental, then there has to be some being beyond myself that's actually controlling reality. And so that would kind of lead towards this idealist view of the world. And in fact, if you look at philosophers like Bernardo Kastrup, he actually argues that we are all just like disassociated aspects of universal consciousness. Now, he takes the view that universal consciousness is like impersonal, Whereas I take the view that it's personal. So, we're going to have some difference there. But for me, I think like if I'm going to make the argument that this universal consciousness is personal, then I just go to like something like fine tuning and argue, okay, well, if God really did want to create life, then wouldn't he would have to create the necessary conditions for life. And so then you would get to the view that God did create humans for a specific purpose and did create life for a specific purpose. And therefore God, would be a personal being. And, that could also have some religious implications as well. So yeah, that's kind of how you connect the dots. It's like, okay, well, if all that exists is consciousness, but yet I do accept that there is an objective reality, then there has to be this objective consciousness that's larger than myself that actually created the reality I see. And so therefore you would necessarily lead to some sort of theism from that.
So I'm sure like somebody who would object would say something like, well, no, why do I need to make that jump, right, to this universal consciousness or whatever?
Well, yeah, okay, that's a good question. Now, there's actually, and I understand where they're coming from, but the issue is there's certain facts about our world that we need to explain. One, we need to explain why we exist in a shared world. Two, we need to explain why we can't control, if our world's mental in nature, why can't we volitionally, change it? And number three, why is it that our mental states are correlated with our brain states? And so those three facts need to be explained, right? And so under a materialist view, you would, of course, just posit this reality that exists beyond consciousness, that we exist in the same world because the same world is, created from material atoms that exist beyond consciousness. And so that's why we experience the way we do. Whereas under my view, under idealism, I would just say that the reason why that we lived in a shared world is because there's this universal consciousness. The reason why we can't change the laws of nature is because we don't create reality, someone else does. Number three, the reason why that our mental states are correlated with our brain states is because our brain states are basically what consciousness looks like from someone else's perspective. So
that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
What's the connection between this and, the digital physics and simulation theory arguments?
It's actually very similar. I have moved away from, so I used to actually hold to some form of simulation theory, but now I lean just to this universal consciousness idea, just because I'm not really sure if it's really hard to define what you mean by simulation. If you're going to define it in if you're going to say oh, well, simulation just means like a universe that's emergent, well, fine. But, you're not going to be able to, you still have that sort of dualism where, this reality is created from a computer or something like that, or a mind. And so I would just move a little bit away from that and just say that we are just in universal consciousness. Now, when it comes to simulation theory, you're still going to run into that infinite regress problem. And so you're going to have some issues with regards to that. But yeah, that is a very interesting question. I don't hold the simulation theory, so I would say it could explain some things, but I'm not really sure. I just think that I think there's some issues with it, just because it creates this dualism, and so I don't really think that's plausible. So.
And when it comes to this universal consciousness, you were saying that it simply opens the door for at least some version of theism. So you wouldn't say, well, simply from this argument alone, let's say it would rule out pantheism in principle. It could open the door for it, but it just opens up the door for some form of theism.
Yeah, well, I would, yeah, and yeah. So I think it actually opens the door for panentheism. I'm not sure if it would open the door to pantheism per se, but it would definitely open the door to panentheism. And the question then is, okay, well, if God exists, is he personal or is he not personal? And so from there, I would just argue for fine tuning to argue that he is personal. So, there is some open way. But I think if you're going to accept the view that we are in universal consciousness, then it would necessarily lead to some form of idealism, even if it's not a personal version of idealism. I mean, theism, sorry.
You're fine. So I think we can now move on from idealism and theism to why exactly belief in God matters. So I'm interested in your take on this issue. I mean, how much of your background philosophy will influence your answer to this question? Or when you contemplate why belief in God matters, are you going to become a sociologist, right? I'm interested in how you're going to approach this question on the importance of belief in God or the value of it.
Okay, so for me, I mean, it's really I think it's important because it kind of brings like a sense of hope to humanity. So if there is no God, then why should I really care? Like if everything's just gonna end one day and the whole universe is just gonna fall into oblivion, like why should I care? And so I think belief in theism really, at least from a not talking whether or not it's true, but just pragmatically speaking, it's like, well, if there is a purpose to humanity, then we should care about our fellow human beings. We shouldn't just, hate each other. I think, humanity should come together and, worship a deity. And again, we could talk about whether or not a God exists, but pragmatically speaking, I think it's better for people to believe in God just because if you're going to take the view that God doesn't exist, then you're going to have a view of the world that's very, I mean, yeah, you could say like, oh, it's a good thing that, we should still treat humans as good, but everyone's a little different. And so I know there are certain people that if without belief in God, they wouldn't be good people. And so, yeah, that's a very good question. I would just say it's important to believe in God because it's just better for humanity.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of religious studies or a lot of psychological studies that show like belief in God is beneficial to both psychology and society as well. So
Yeah, I
yeah, I would just kind of
remember, what was it, when Michael Jones did his debate? I think it was with Aaron Raw on the issue of what was it, like whether or not religion is correlated with violence or negative social effects. I don't know if it was his debate with Aaron Raw, but I remember Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy did a great job in defending that thesis. So I think what you're saying is, look, belief in God is just, when you look at how it affects people, what it like, when you look at the, let's say this seems like more like a consequentialist kind of argument, right? Like when you look at the
right.
consequences of belief in God, even like if there is some bad stuff, right, what you can see is that overwhelmingly it has the potential to be good. I mean, and of course, I've heard many atheists and, respond back, well, if the only reason why you're good is because you have this make believe sky daddy, telling you what to do, whatever, then you're a pretty pitiful person. And it's like, sure, let's say that everyone is just so pitifully sad that they have to
Yeah,
believe in this. It doesn't matter. By consequence, it's making the world better. I
right.
don't know what you think about that. Or how would
No,
you?
I think it's a good point because I do think that even, I mean, yes, I'm a Christian, so I would take the view that humanity is ultimately depraved. But even just from a psychological standpoint, like, yeah, humanity is depraved. Like, it's very hard. Even if I wasn't a Christian, it would be very hard for me to deny the fact that humanity people just typically are not good. And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to, take down humanity, but I'm just saying like we do some pretty terrible things to each other. So just from even if I wasn't a Christian, it would be very difficult for me to actually accept that human beings are naturally good because I just don't think they are.
Mhm.
And so I think belief in God actually kind of helps to counter that badness and tries to make people good, at least from a pragmatic standpoint. So now I'm not really, because I know there are certain atheists that argue that because God doesn't exist, then it's bad to believe in something that's wrong. But again, that's not really the issue. So, whatever. But
Mhm.
it
I've
is what
heard
it is.
there's one philosopher that I like a lot by the name of Sir Roger Scruton, and he has this great quote. He says, "The consolation of imaginary things does not make the consolation imaginary," or whatever.
Right.
Like the way that it really does affect people, even if, let's say, it's quote unquote false or doesn't exist, the fact that it has such this deep impact on people's
Right. Well,
lives, yeah.
you make a good point because, like, for example, like if free will didn't exist, for example, like
Mhm.
people would act very differently if they don't believe in free will. Whereas if you do believe in free will, whether or not it actually exists, you're gonna act normally like a better person because
Mhm.
if you believe that like everything is just predetermined by prior causes, then you're gonna act very differently than if you believe that you actually do have free will. And so if you do have free will, then you do have this sense of moral responsibility. And so it's kind of like the same thing with God, where it's like if God exists, then you have this sense of moral responsibility. And so you're going to generally act better towards other people because of
I
that.
mean, and like, and belief in free will is just so natural, Like
Right.
anytime somebody has to explain, well, no, actually, we don't have free will, or the belief in like the objectivity of moral values. Well, actually, morality is just illusory, right? It's always just counterintuitive, and you're always going to have the larger burden if you're arguing against what people just find so intuitive. And to me, it makes me wonder, well, then, like, if reality is really one other way, then why do we have all these weird intuitions that seem to go against reality? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right. Well, I do think, yeah, exactly. I do think intuition is very important. I do argue from intuition a lot. Now, intuition is not infallible, obviously,
mhm.
but it is important. It's a good starting point. If you have an intuition, a strong intuition about something, and if there's nothing that disproves the intuition, then you should believe it. Like that's just rational. It's like it's rational to believe in free will because I don't think there's anything that disproves it, and so that's why I do believe in free will. Likewise, I think that belief in God is intuitive, and so I'm going to believe it unless there's some good argument that refutes that belief.
Mm. And
So
I've always heard like people say, well, no, you shouldn't trust your intuitions, whatever. And it's like, you don't realize that at some point in your chain of reasoning, like you're trusting some kind of intuition, or you're taking something for granted, right?
right,
Everybody says, no, no, you have to justify every single belief that you have with another set of facts and arguments. It's like, no, that's not how I like how you use the word pragmatic, right? That's not how
yeah.
people really approach life. People approach life by saying, okay, well, my intuitions seem to be reasonable here. So from here, I'm actually going to start building up arguments to defend these more controversial specific beliefs.
Right, and I think I mean, for me, it's like if you're gonna doubt something, like there's no reason to doubt something just to doubt it. Like if you're gonna doubt something, actually have a good reason to doubt. Don't just doubt it because just just don't doubt something just to doubt. Like that's why I typically take issue with like epistemic skepticism, which is a view that we are supposed to like doubt everything unless we have like absolute proof of something. It's like no, like you're not don't be skeptical of something just to be skeptical of something. Like that's why I like the principle of credulity, because it's like if there is something that is intuitive and seems to be the case, and if there's no evidence that refutes that, then you should believe it, you know. And so that's why it's like if for me, it comes down to basically this: like, let's say if there's two people, one of them believes everything, and the other person doubts everything. I'm going to trust the person that believes everything, even if they may be wrong. They're certainly right on some things, whereas the person that doubts everything is going to be wrong on everything.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where I go. It's like I'm going to accept certain beliefs if they're intuitive, because it's a good starting point. You don't, there's just no good reason to doubt just for the sake of doubting.
And
So
I've also heard of like the principle of credulity being associated with like the argument from religious experience, especially like Swinburne and Kaimon Kwan. They use this principle in their arguments. Can you explain what is the principle of credulity? And I mean, if you want to go down the route of explaining how it's related to the argument from religious experience, you can, or what like just explain first the principle, if you will, to the audience.
well, I mean, the principle is just basically like if you have some experience and there's no reason to doubt it, or there's no good reason to doubt it, then you should believe that experience actually occurred. And so when it comes to religious experience, it's like if you have this religious experience, this very strong religious experience, and there's no good reason to doubt that experience, or there's no defeater, then you should believe that. Now, of course, a religious experience alone is not good evidence for God, because you have a lot of different religions that have it, but still you're gonna, when it comes to like the cumulative case for theism, that's an important aspect of it. And so there's just, again, if there's no, unless you have like a really good argument against religious experience, there's no good reason to really doubt it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where the principle of credulity would apply. And
So
so
backing up a little earlier, I remember you mentioned that, well, so we basically agreed that religion is important for society. And
right,
even if we accept it's false, that doesn't mean it's bad necessarily,
right.
right? If you, from a consequentialist standpoint, if you will. But I'm interested on, let's say, the the reverse, right? Would we say that atheism is bad for society?
I would have to, there would have to be studies on whether or not atheism were bad for society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it really depends on if I don't know because I haven't looked into. I mean, I've just focused on the religious aspect. I haven't focused on the non-religious aspect or the atheistic aspect. So if it's the case that atheism is bad for society, then I think you should question it, just from a pragmatic standpoint, and then from there maybe make some arguments against it. But only if that's the case. Again, I wouldn't know because
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really looked into it. But if you made that now, if atheism were good for society, that's different because then you're gonna have to take into consider, well, if God exists, but then non-belief is fine or non-belief is good for society, then does it really go? But I guess for that, at that point it's kind of like a stalemate where it's like, religion and non-religion is good for society, which it's kind of weird. But I wouldn't really know because I'm not sure if there's any studies on that. But to me at that point I would just go to the actual evidence, like, okay, well, forget about the pragmatic stuff, let's look at whether or not it's actually true.
Mm-hmm.
So
I remember I was reading some of the work of John Locke, and I remember his paper or his letter on tolerance, right? Like a very, very fascinating, very good letter. And I noticed there's one part where he says we shouldn't tolerate atheists in our society because they're going to undermine the fabric of everything we believe in, the moral order that allows us to even understand, right, principles of tolerance and so forth. So his idea was that if you accept somebody into your community who is undermining the very core intellectual substance of what holds it all together, then that shouldn't be tolerated. Which I thought was fascinating because then, everybody highlights Locke as this example of tolerance, but then we seem pretty tolerant of atheists in our society.
yeah, for me, I mean, if you're going to be an atheist, I think you should have a some sort of meta-ethical theory on morality, because you don't want to
Mm-hmm.
let's just say that God doesn't exist. Okay, you don't want to throw out God and then throw out objective morality at the same time. Like, that's not the way to go. So
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're going to be an atheist, you should actually hold to some sort of objective morality, just so that you can avoid those moral issues. So it is what it is. But
All right, so we can now move to our third item of discussion, which kind of deals with the deconversion of Joshua Harris. He was the Christian author, I think, who wrote, I forgot what the book's name was, but it was a book about dating or whatever. And apparently, this book really messed some Christians up. And then,
yeah, it actually, in fact, I'm not going to mention him, but I do have a friend that got really hurt by, not by the book, just by the movement. But I understand the book did have a big impact on the movement itself. So I'm gonna, it is kind of the book's fault. But I know someone that, I'm not going to mention his name, but I know someone that literally could not, like, he got depression because of this sort of movement. And I feel really sorry for him, and it sucks. And I know he's not the only one. There's plenty of other people that have gone to the same issue, and I can understand why Joshua Harris did what he did by denouncing his book. And it's because just there's just no evidence to suggest that if you date someone before marriage, then somehow your marriage is going to be better, or that you're going to have the perfect love life. Like, that's just completely false.
well,
And so,
wasn't his view of like dating like very, very, very stringent or something like that?
yeah, well, yeah, he thought that dating was bad. So he kind of like made his own model of dating, which is called courtship, which is where you technically date someone, but if you're going to date them, you basically have to marry them. Like,
Hmm.
where you can't, and not only that, but like, you can't have any physical intimacy with them whatsoever. Which basically means, like, you can't kiss them. You can't have any physical intimacy at all, and you can only stay with that person. And if you don't marry them, then that's gonna be a big problem, for your future courtship people. But I can understand why he did it. And there's I listened to a podcast about a week ago about this. I think it was on the Christian Premier Radio, and he had a few people on there that were discussing Justice Harris's deconversion, and it basically was because of this courtship movement or this purity culture
Hmm.
that started around the 1960s and 70s, around the same time after the sexual revolution started. It was like a response to the sexual revolution, and so it kind of took the opposite approach, which is just hardcore celibacy, but also courtship, which is where you can't date anyone before marriage, and that had a lot of problems within the church because it just doesn't work.
I mean, I've heard it kind of sometimes in some Christian circles, this kind of courtship model implicitly praised or endorsed, but I feel as if, but people like, when I started reading like the reviews of Joshua Harris's book, people were talking about like, oh, when we got married after we read this book, we started realizing we didn't know how to be physically intimate with each other, or we hadn't really worked out like what is it going to be like when we, try to have kids or whatever, like all this weird stuff that you're
Right.
supposed to at least talk about or figure out ahead of time before you get into
Right.
whole
Well, that's one of the issues. But the other issue is this whole. I think one of the major problems with this purity culture is that it literally it makes virginity like this. It basically makes it like God almost. It
Hmm.
like it makes virginity like this. Oh, if you lose your virginity before marriage, then like you're eternally cursed,
Hmm.
which is just not biblical at all.
Oh, so
And
it's a very extreme elevation of quote unquote purity.
yeah, it's like an extreme, yeah, exactly. It's like an extreme version of like sexual purity where it's like if you have sex before marriage at all, you're eternally doomed.
Hmm.
Like it's
Wow.
it's very it's very it's very odd, which is again, it's not biblical. And just because you're not a virgin at marriage doesn't mean that your marriage isn't going to work out. So I mean, that's one of the bigger issues. Is like it basically makes virginity like this number one thing. Like, oh my God, like if you're not a virgin, you're a really bad person. It's like, no, like that's not biblical. There's plenty of other sins that do a lot more damage to our spiritual lives than that. So, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing to view it like that. But if you're going to take it to that level, it's not a good thing. So,
Hmm. So then what would you suggest for Christians on how to navigate, the cultural space? Because obviously it's been affected by the sexual revolution. And
right.
the opposite is kind of making sex and losing virginity to God, right? What should be the Christian alternative to this?
Well, to me, for me, it's like, let's just go back to what the actual Bible says. Like, yes, you should try to save sexual marriage, but don't make it like this. Don't make virginity your God. Like,
Hmm.
understand that you're a finite creature, understand that you're a sinner, understand that you have a fallen nature. And so if you mess up, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Now, yes, it's still a bad thing, but there's plenty of other things in our lives that we need to fix. And so for me, it's like, yes, you should wait till marriage, but if for some odd reason it doesn't, if you can't, or not if you can't, but like if you don't, that doesn't mean that therefore you're eternally doomed. Like that's why for me, I just don't try to make virginity like, again, don't make virginity like this number one thing that you need to save until marriage. Like, no, like try to focus on what's going to make you better as a person and better as a child of God. And so when it comes to marriage, I think, now to be fair, I do think that recreational dating is wrong. I think if you're going to date just to date, I think that's an issue. So if you're going to date someone, I think that you should orient it toward marriage. So don't like date someone and then be like, oh, well, I don't want to marry you. Like, no, date them because you want to eventually marry them. So that's kind of the approach I take. So,
And I like how you included at least a lot of these Christian movements that have risen up have given up on the idea of really being gracious towards people when they make mistakes.
right, right. And again, if you do make a mistake, if you do have premarital sex, again, it's not the end of the world. You should, like, that's why Jesus came down, is because we're sinners, right? So
Hmm.
yes, having sex before marriage is a sin, but if you do it, it's not the end of the world. You still have grace. And
Mm.
that's an important aspect that I think the purity culture miss, is it forgot that whole grace aspect
Mm.
of it. And so, yeah, I mean, That's kind of my approach.
So then, like, since we kind of have this theological core about grace, but also like the ugliness of sin and the necessity of a savior and so forth, of
Right.
God's love really redeeming us and changing us and fixing our flawed humanity, I'm interested in. I mean, so from my perspective, I don't know what exactly was going on in Joshua Harris's life when he, left the faith, when he apostatized. I mean, he divorced, I think, first from his wife, and then he announced his apostasy. I mean, if everything's connected back to that book, then I think that's a really like just baseless reason to leave the faith. Like, it's not.
Right. Well,
I don't know. Yeah.
that's the problem with this whole purity culture is like it seems like a lot of it has stemmed back to this whole idea or their idea of marriage. And so his idea was like, if my model doesn't work, or if courtship doesn't work or whatever, then all of Christianity is wrong. Because he thought that that's what the Bible taught, which it doesn't. The Bible teaches that we're sinners and that we need a savior. And so yes, he is right in the sense of, yes, you should wait until marriage, but if you don't, again, you got to remember there's two aspects to this. So on the one hand, yes, it's true that you should wait till marriage. However, on the other hand, if you fail, you have grace. That's the whole point. So that's kind of, and again, that may go back to like it might go back to like how, because I have like this very unique view of, not unique view of sin, but I view sin as more of like, the reason why God's against sin is not because we're breaking his law necessarily, but because sin will ultimately hurt us by making us separate from God, making us separate from holiness. So, yeah.
All right. So, and then the second thing I wanted to discuss too was Marty Sampson of Hillsong, the church. He's a worship leader. He was discussing how he says, from all the sources that I'm seeing right now, it says that he was saying, I'm genuinely losing my faith, not that he has lost his faith, right? And then I looked at what the most recent articles were, and they were all like 3 to 4 weeks ago. So I don't know what's happened to that story. But I think he was talking about how nobody wants to confront the hard questions about Christianity or something.
And I was like, okay, well, you have to ignore a lot of apologists that have written on this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, he's a little different because he's not coming from this courtship background, but rather he's coming from a more skeptical background where it's like, oh, Christians have not really dealt with these questions. It's like, yes, they have. To me, it's like for him, I don't really think he's actually looked at the literature. Now, yes, it is true that he may have like read some apologists or like watch some YouTube videos, but if you want to really get in deep into it, you have to like look into the actual literature. And so,
So we have like a transcript of his post from let's see here. Yeah, from I think it was what post was it? Like a Twitter post or something? I don't know.
I think it was Twitter, and then I think it was Instagram as well. I'm not sure, but
let me make this just okay. There we go. Okay, so here is what he says. He says, time for some real talk. I'm genuinely losing my faith, and it doesn't bother me, which is the interesting part, and it doesn't bother me. But but then he goes to the trouble of making this post and everything. But like, what bothers me now is nothing. I am so happy now, so at peace with the world. It's crazy. So that's a very interesting thing. Usually when people question their faith, they're like feeling horrible or like the whole world is coming crashing down. So we can talk about that, but let's look at really what reasons he offers. So he says, this is a soapbox moment. So here I go. How many preachers fall or maybe fail? I don't know. Many. No one talks about it. Okay.
Wait, I can't see it on my end. I think it's like this.
Is it blurry?
No, it's not blurry because are you viewing? Okay, it says I'm viewing your screen, but then I see this Bible Sakra edition stuff. That's weird. Oh well. Yep, I don't. Anyways, go on.
Oh, you might be seeing my other tab. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Put it back. Do you see it now?
Okay, yeah, I see it. There we go.
All right, good. Okay, so then I just need to keep it on this window. Anyway, so he says, this is a soapbox moment. So here I go. How many preachers fall? I think he means maybe fail. Many. No one talks about it. I don't know what that's supposed to prove. How many miracles happen? Not many. No one talks about it. Why is the Bible full of contradictions? No one talks about it. How can God be love yet send 4 billion people to a place all cause they don't believe? No one talks about it. Christians can be the most judgmental people on the planet. They can also be some of the most beautiful and loving people, but it's not for me. So before we get into anything else, let's look at these first two paragraphs. So I don't know. I don't want to do like some dollar shop psychoanalysis here, but I mean, what's your take on the fact how he's not bothered by genuinely losing his faith? I mean, what do you think do you think we can tell or find it, or does this tell us anything about him that's meaningful?
I think he's just asking some interesting questions, but he hasn't, I mean, for this, I mean, it's not really an argument. It's like, it's a bunch of questions put together.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, I can understand, like, there are some people, including him, that like have this, I don't want to say, well, I'm going to say it, but this like psychological doubt within their minds because of these questions.
Mm.
And I think it's because he's trying to process a lot of information at the same time and he doesn't know how to really respond to it. So that's why he has put all these questions together and then basically said like, oh, well, how many people just fall? Many. No one talks about it. And then he goes and asks a bunch of different questions and then makes the claim that no one really talks about those things.
I like how you said it was a psychological doubt and not
right.
just,
And that's the thing. Whenever you have doubt, I mean, not just about religion, but like whenever you have doubt about anything, it's always going to be psychological. And so typically when that happens, it's because you're trying to process a lot of information at one time, but then you don't really know how to deal with it. And so you just start doubting that belief that you're having.
Mm-hmm.
So, it kind of really depends. And that's why for me, it's like, if I'm going to doubt something, I'm going to try to my best to put it into an actual argument and then see if that argument stands.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah.
I'm and the feeling that I get. I don't want to make like comments about Hillsong, the church that I don't really know much about them. But it seems as if they might be this kind of group that's like super kind of big on emotions and art and music and just feel it, And then when you have these questions, I don't know if they've really prepared the intellectual structure of their mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they haven't. I mean, yes, they have built like this emotional structure to their mind, but then when it comes to the more intellectual aspect, because they don't understand the intellectual aspect, then they're trying to process all this information at once, and then they get to this point where they start actually doubting their beliefs because they can't answer these questions in a good way. And so I think that's what's kind of happening here.
Well, and this next paragraph I think is actually really interesting because it says, I am not in anymore. I want genuine truth, not the quote unquote, I just believe it kind of truth. So that's already like, hitting at what we were talking about.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, for me, I'm sure you would agree with me. Like, I care about truth ultimately. Like, if I found out Christianity was wrong, I'm going to change my beliefs. Like, again, I care about what's true more than anything else. And so to some extent, I could actually understand where he's coming from because he actually wants genuine truth. And I'm sure any intellectual person would want genuine truth. And so, yes, I would agree with him that you can't have this I just believe it because kind of truth. So, yes, I would agree with him here. I just don't really think that he's looked into the intellectual aspect of the faith.
Right. And look at his next little part of his statement. Science keeps piercing the truth of every religion. Lots of things help people change their lives, not just one version of God. Got so much more to say, but for me, I keeping it real. Unfollow if you want. I've never been about living my life for others. So obviously, I think what I like about this statement is that he's expressing, I think, a very genuine, like, I want the truth and I don't care what you guys think. And I think that's a healthy way to look at it because you really shouldn't care what your social group is pressuring you to believe. You should care about the truth.
Right.
Okay, so here's the thing. What's your take on the science and religion issue?
Well, to me, I would go back to any of the arguments for theism, and a lot of them are from the science, like fine-tuning, the Kalam, the cosmic consciousness argument. When I was talking about quantum mechanics earlier, same thing. So yeah, I would just, when it comes to that, I would just go back to the arguments and deal with any objections that come up, because I don't really see how at least from what I've studied, I'm not really sure how science pierces the truth of religion, because it seems to be the exact opposite, where science is kind of supporting theism better and better.
I mean,
Um,
and the thing is too, like so many people define science in different ways, so that you really need to get down to the truth
right,
of like, what do you mean by
because
science and religion?
because it depends, because for some people science is equivalent to materialism. So it's like,
Hmm.
you're gonna run into that issue, where like, if you're gonna, like, for example, if you're gonna take the view of science that science is materialistic, and so the method by which science works is materialistic, and so it can't possibly make any conclusions about conscious agents, like, you're gonna run into that issue. um so yeah,
Hmm.
it really depends on how you think of science in that
Hmm.
sort of way.
Because I mean, some people will say, well, like science is just, well, it depends. So some people say like science is just methodological naturalism, right?
Yeah.
That you just, it's the method of just assuming when you're studying the natural world that you don't need any supernatural explanation. So even if I accept that definition, I'm like, well, what's the problem here? You know, like, are you assuming, like, the only reason why that would be problematic for religion, methodological naturalism, is if we're assuming that methodological naturalism or just naturalism is the only way to acquire knowledge about
Well,
the world.
right, and I think it also comes down to, like, if you're gonna, like, take a more pragmatic approach to, like, for example, when I was talking about quantum mechanics earlier, I was talking about how you could take a pragmatic approach to the observer effect, which is where you just basically just explain the observer effect in terms of interaction of particles, and that's fine, but you're not going to make any philosophical implications from that, because it's purely pragmatic. Whereas if you actually want to make philosophical implications from the science, then you would sort of lead to a non or an idealist picture of the world.
Hmm.
So it just really depends on whether or not you're going to view science as just a purely pragmatic tool, or if you're going to view it as something that could actually make philosophical implications about reality.
Yeah, that's right. So to the last point then, uh, the last item of discussion, how would you suggest preparing Christians for this day and age? So there's obviously like a lot of things to prepare Christians on, or things that Christians should be ready for. So there's like a cultural shift. There's the social reality that you're just not really going to be liked if you hold to traditional Christian beliefs. You're going to have a hard time fitting in or feeling like you're welcomed or invited if that really matters to you. But and then there's the intellectual stuff too, how everybody just kind of takes for granted, like, oh, I think theism is just false and science debunks religion and all these other things. So how would you, let's say, if you had a Christian under your care, how would you prepare them for the world?
I think you should just educate them, look at the arguments from both sides, both the arguments supporting God's existence and the arguments against God's existence, and then also looking at things like the historical Jesus, and looking at, whether or not you could actually conclude that the resurrection occurred in the first century. And so I think, again, just basic apologetics, and not just basic apologetics, but, like, I'm talking like the best argument, like we do go to people like Richard Swinburne, for example, is a good example. Or if you go in, or when it comes to like historical Jesus studies, you go to someone like James Patrick Holding. Or I have a book right now, it's called The Jesus Legend, and it makes pretty good arguments for the reliability of the New Testament, and it actually criticizes a lot of the form criticism that is prevalent among secular academic scholars that deal with the historicity of Jesus. And so I would go back to apologetics, but I would also just read the literature, or read the academic literature that a lot of philosophers have done. Richard Swinburne, again, is a good example of this.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, I mean, I used to be kind of a fan of like Frank Turek, but
Yeah.
now I'm like way beyond that. Now I look at the actual academic literature
Yeah.
on both sides. And so that's what I would go to, is just look at the best academic literature that exists on the subject so that you can get an informed decision. So,
I mean, when
yeah,
it's come in your walk with God, if you don't mind getting a little personal, what would you say has been a doubt that you had to really that you were really challenged by, and how did you overcome it?
for me, it was the problem of evil was a really big
That's
one.
right.
And because at the time I started to doubt free will, and I was like, okay, well, free will doesn't exist. And if there's evil, then how you can't really make a free will defense from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to run into this issue of, because here's the thing is like, I do think that there are good arguments against God. The problem of evil is one of those good arguments. In fact, I think it's the best argument against God. And I do think it is evidence against God. I just don't think it's not enough to actually weigh the evidence for God, because I think the evidence for God outweighs the evidence against God. And so that's why I kind of take more of a Bayesian approach to knowledge, where it's like everything could have evidence for it. It's just whether or not which one has the most evidence to support it. And so for me, the problem of evil is one of the big issues that I had to deal with, especially the evidential problem of evil, because if you really think about it, like if there's so much evil in the world, is it the case that that evil overcome, or is enough evidence to actually overturn the case for theism? And so the way that I have actually helped to deal with that issue would be Clay Jones's theodicy on it, which is basically that evil exists because we humans are just naturally evil, and that the reason why God doesn't stop evil is because he wants to see the consequences of what it's like to have a world without God. And so that not only does that really explain evil, but that also explains like divine hiddenness as well, because if you're going to live in a world without God, then you could basically do whatever you want, but then at the same time, you're going to see the consequences of what happens when you're going to do whatever you want. And so you're going to have this evil take place. And so for me, I think the one thing that kind of weakened the problem of evil, or the evidential problem, was the fact that Jesus actually came down and suffered on the cross. Because if God really did not care about evil, why would he come down and suffer on the cross and die for our sins? And so I kind of, like, my view of hell is kind of the sort of same way, where I view sin as like this internal thing within us that ultimately is going to destroy us, and that's why God wants to try to save us from that sin. It's not because he's doing it because he wants to, like, what's it called? It's not like, oh, well, you broke my rules, so therefore I'm going to punish you, and I'm trying to save you from my own punishment. Like, no, he's trying to save us from ourselves.
That's right.
Because what he realizes is that there's something deep within us that only he can provide. There's like this eternal void that if we don't accept God, then whatever we do accept to be our foundation or our purpose, that's ultimately, since it's not God, it's not going to really fulfill us in the same sort of way. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so I like the authors that you're reading. You mentioned Richard Swinburne and the Bayesian approach to belief and so forth. So, yeah, you got some good stuff there. Before I go, I just want to ask you a question. Are you a senior in high school now, or are you a freshman in college?
Freshman in college.
All right, cool. So I'm wishing you the best of luck. You're obviously a philosophy major, right?
No, I'm not.
Oh, no, come on, man. So what are you majoring in?
Just business administration, so I might change it because I don't like math. So we'll see.
All right.
I do philosophy as a hobby. I'm not, I might just. I know if I don't get a philosophy major, I'm not going to be able to publish in academia, but I'll probably know a lot about it anyways. So
you'll be satisfied, even if you're not on the battlefield necessarily, right? In the trenches of it. Well, I want to thank you, Kyle, for coming out on the show today. Before I really start going to the final announcements and end off the episode, is there anything you want to say before I do all that?
Yeah, just if you have any doubts about your beliefs, try to form it out in an argument and see if it actually holds up. And then, if you need to talk to someone else about it and be like, hey, does this argument work? Or, whatever. And I think for me, it's like, I care about truth ultimately. So I'm going to use arguments that are the best, right? So that I can reach truth. And so I think I would encourage every Christian to, again, look at both sides of the argument and understand both viewpoints so that you can make an informed decision. So,
all right. All right. Thank you, Kyle. So here's the big news that I've been trying to keep hidden from everybody, but I'm going to let it all out now. So, one is that I'm going to start interviewing some old guests that we've had on the show again to get them really. A lot of people were very interested in the material on Aristotle and classical theism, so I'm going to bring that back. And I was able to get Robert Koons to come and talk to us about Aristotelianism and conservatism. So when I can have the chance to interview him, we're going to have an actual professional philosopher, analytic philosopher right in the field discussing with us some of these ideas. So it's going to be really fascinating. I think this is the 29th episode of Intellectual Conservatism. Let me thank Kyle for being on here. His YouTube channel is Christian Idealism. Check it out. He's got some great videos, and I can't wait to see what Kyle has planned for the future. But aside from that, I think that's all that we have for this episode. So thank you for watching Intellectual Conservatism.